So as you all know, the committee was formed in 1966. I want to think back to that period. China's role in the Korean War remained vivid. McCarthyism was a recent memory, and thousands of Americans were dying annually in the war in Vietnam. A group of American scholars, joined by far-sighted civic, religious, and business leaders, saw the need for wide public discussion of China and its relations with the United States, recognizing that the PRC's isolation might be harmful, not beneficial to the United States. From those early days and throughout our history, the National Committee has been working to improve ties and understanding between our two nations. However, today, we are at a point where fear and mistrust on both sides are straining those ties, creating misunderstanding and causing some to doubt the very concept of constructive engagement. Many in the executive and legislative branches, as well as some in the think tank and academic communities in the United States, argue that constructive engagement has not served the American people, and that China's WTO accession was bad for Americans. The President's national security strategy argues that China, along with Russia, are strategic competitors, despite the fact that it is America, not China, that has withdrawn from the Paris Accords, UNESCO, and the Iran Agreement. It brands China a revisionist power. Among other ideas, they propose tariffs on Chinese goods, to restrict Chinese investment in the United States, to direct military expenditures to counter a rising China, and to limit Chinese students coming to the United States. These policies destroy the foundations of the U.S. China relationship, misdirect our 21st century priorities, and hurt the American people. Indeed, today we are at an inflection point where commitments need to be made. Our commitment is to the values and vision of our founders, who believed that engagement was better than estrangement. While many of these policies and views are based on exaggerations and distortions, in truth, it is not difficult to see why we are here. Over the past few years, the Chinese government has adopted policies that have alienated even ardent supporters of constructive engagement. In the business and trade realms, we see entire sectors closed to foreign investment, a lack of transparency in rulemaking, regulatory enforcement that discriminates against foreigners, stalled third plenum reforms, lack of the rule of law, and high tariffs that should have been reduced decades ago. In the academic space, the denial of visas for those who write negatively about China alienates academics who believe in academic freedom. In the nonprofit sector, the introduction of the International NGO Management Law has made it more difficult for even non-controversial NGOs to operate in China. The blocking of Facebook, Google, YouTube, Twitter, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal sows distrust among Americans who rely on their news and for communications. Finally, China's reclamation and militarization of islands in the South China Seas in violation of international law lead believers in the international system to question whether China can be the responsible stakeholder that Bob Zoellick called on it to be in our dinner in 2005. In the U.S., there are those who consistently misconstrue China's actions and exaggerate China's impact. Claims, for example, that America has lost 6 million manufacturing jobs to China ignores the fact that automation and technology, along with relocation of jobs to Mexico, Canada, and other countries, are important causes. The focus on bilateral trade deficit ignores the fact that in the last 10 years, China's current account surplus to GDP has dropped from 9% to 1.5%. This trend more accurately reflects China's surplus rather than bilateral trade statistics. On the strategic side, the same occurs. When I was talking with a senior military official recently, he said to me, China's action in the South China Sea is the equivalent of Russia's action in the Ukraine and Crimea. Why I believe China's action in the South China Sea is inconsistent with international law. Let's keep in mind that more than 10,000 people died in Russia's invasion of Ukraine. None have died in the South China Sea. So constructive engagement has not failed. It needs to be rebooted to meet challenges that our founders could not have envisioned. Let's briefly look at the history. A few years after we started to engage with China, American soldiers stopped dying in Asia and haven't died since. Constructive engagement coupled with China's reform and opening have lifted hundreds of millions of Chinese out of poverty. The China Jerry and I moved to in 1979 required that we obtain a travel permit anytime we left Beijing to travel within China. When Chinese graduated from high school or college then, the state assigned them places to work. They couldn't get a passport. It is so different today. Now 120 million Chinese travel abroad annually, and these trips generate, for Americans, more than $33 billion. China has grown to become the third largest destination for American goods and services, and as we heard from President Trump this morning, the #1 purchaser of agricultural products. Trade with China supports 2.6 million American jobs. And we expect that by 2030, we'll have over $520 billion in exports to China. Chinese manufacturing has also lowered prices in the United States for consumer goods and put in the average American family $850 additional dollars. I always joke, rich people don't care, but the average American family cares a lot. While China is still not the responsible stakeholder we hoped it would become, it has come a long way. China provides the largest number of UN peacekeepers among the permanent 5 of the United Nations. Its Belt and Road Initiative and Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank has helped fill a need for development finance that multinational institutions have not been able to provide. Most importantly, after almost constant war in Asia for 5 decades, since constructive engagement, we have seen peace in Asia. This is no coincidence. Beyond the economics, though, constructive engagement has had qualitative benefits. The hundreds of thousands of Chinese students who come to America have enriched the campuses and American life. When I hear talk of limiting visas to Chinese STEM students, I realize how destructive the current trend has become. I think of my friend Ming Xie, who came to America from Guangzhou to study engineering at USC. After graduation, he invented a high-speed biometric fingerprint system that now supplies the Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, and other agencies. If the limitations now being discussed had been in place when he came to the United States, when he tried to come to the United States, this winner of the Ellis Island Medal of Honor, after whom the USC School of Engineering is named, would have been prevented from studying in the United States. And his contribution to American society would have never occurred. The purpose of constructive engagement was never to make China just like us. It is critical we are clear-eyed about this, as well as realistic about what is in our power to influence. The goal of engagement was always to make China a productive member of the global community. And in truth, we've made substantial progress. As China becomes more prosperous and powerful, it naturally wields greater influence in the world. This does not make us strategic competitors. It does not make confrontation inevitable. What it does demand is that we prepare for challenges to the United States that the founders of the National Committee could never have envisioned. And constructive engagement needs to adapt to this new reality. We need to honestly face the fact, no matter what we do, China will continue its rise, and we want to do everything we can to make its rise benefit the global community. The question is, how should the United States act in light of an evolving China? When China is characterized as a strategic competitor and revisionist power, and we are told we must spend tens or even hundreds of billions to defeat and deter China, I'm reminded of the words of the great general and later President Dwight D. Eisenhower. Every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fires signifies, in the final sense, a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and are not clothed. And I would add, those who suffer from deteriorating infrastructure that is not fixed, and the undereducated who remain uneducated. Domestic challenges within the United States and China and the world's great transnational issues, terrorism, financial and economic crisis, climate change, pandemics, use of artificial intelligence and big data to serve humankind, peace on the Korean Peninsula cannot be solved if we treat China as an enemy. They can only be solved if we work together. So allow me to conclude by saying it's time. No, it's past time that each and every one of you participates in this debate, because it will determine our future. If you do, and if you do every day the way we at the National Committee do, I'm convinced that the U.S. China relationship will get back on the right track, because in the end, it's the people in this room, it's the people of the United States, and the people of China that will determine the future of the most important relationship in the world. 谢谢各位. Thank you all very much.